A simple invitation from I'd only ever glimpsed and ever glimpsed. I knew I should have refused, but that night I was too tired to feel strong. And that's where it all began. A decision that slowly tested the limits of loyalty, guilt, and the true meaning of going home. That night, I sat alone in the living room, accompanied by the dim light and the increasingly loud ticking of the clock. My husband was out of town on assignment, as usual. But somehow, this time, was different. The house that once felt warm now felt like it had lost its soul. I tried to distract myself, but every corner reminded me of an emptiness I couldn't explain. Until a small incident, something that should have been ordinary, led me to a choice I never imagined before. My name is Lyra. From the outside, my life may seem calm, even almost perfect. I married Dimas, the man I once chose with full confidence. Someone I loved not for luxury, but for his simplicity. We built a household from scratch, going through difficult times together until finally we were able to live in a small, comfortable house in a peaceful neighborhood. Dimas is the type of husband who works hard. He rarely complained, always trying to give his best, even if it meant frequently traveling out of town for work. At first I was proud. I felt like I had a responsible partner who was willing to sacrifice for our future. But as time went by, I began to notice a small thing slowly turning into a big one: loneliness. My days were monotonous. In the mornings, I cleaned the house, cooked, and then spent time doing simple things like watching television or aimlessly scrolling through my phone. Nothing was really wrong, but nothing really filled me either. The house was too quiet when Dimas wasn't around. Next door lived a college student named Rian. I learned his name from a brief conversation with the landlady. Rian was rarely seen, but occasionally I'd see him leaving in the morning with a backpack and a tired look on his face. We never really spoke, just smiled or nodded when we passed each other. To me, Rian was just part of the background of everyday life, like the sound of passing motorbikes or children playing in the afternoon. Not important, not meaningful either. Until one day, Dimas came home earlier than usual. I still remember that afternoon. The sky was orange and the wind blew softly, carrying the scent of rain. He sat beside me, took my hand, and said he had to go again. This time for longer than usual. I might be a week or more, he said, quietly. I smiled, trying to appear strong as usual. It's okay, honey, the important thing is that you take care of that thorn there. He nodded and hugged me briefly. Warm, but it felt short, too short. That night we ate together like a normal couple. There were no arguments, no signs of major problems. But inside, there was something different, like a distance that was invisible, but I could feel it. The next morning, Dimas left. I stood in front of the door, waving as his car pulled away until it disappeared around the corner. After that, everything was quiet again. I went inside the house, closing the door gently. The sound of the key turning was louder than usual, as if to confirm that I was truly alone. The first day went normally. I tried to keep busy, tried not to think too much. But as night fell, the feeling returned, and stronger, more real. I sat alone in the living room, staring at the television screen without really paying attention. Without realizing it, my eyes glanced towards the window. Outside, the lights of the house next door were still on. A shadow could be seen moving slowly behind the curtains. Maybe it was Rian. For some reason, for the first time, I was truly aware of his presence. And for the first time, I also felt that my loneliness might not be completely alone. The feeling just came, strange, subtle, but strong enough to make me stare longer at the window. The shadow in the house next door was still moving. Then suddenly it stopped. I reflexively pulled the curtain as if afraid of being caught watching. I shook my head slowly. "What the hell is a lyric?" I muttered, trying to laugh at my own thoughts. The night was getting late.
but the feeling of anxiety was getting stronger. I tried to fall asleep faster, hoping it was all just a momentary feeling. But before I could close my eyes, the sound of thunder roared loudly, followed by heavy rain that fell without warning. Strong winds made the windows vibrate. The lights in my room flickered a few times, then went out completely. Dark, silent. My heart immediately beat faster. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the small flashlight on the screen. The dim light actually made the atmosphere feel even stranger. Calm, only the electricity was out. I whispered, trying to calm myself. But the fear was real. The house felt too big to be alone in this situation. Every little sound sounded suspicious, whether it was a falling twig or the wind rustling the roof tiles. I tried to call Dimas, but the signal suddenly weakened. My call wouldn't go through. Panic began to creep in slowly. I stood in the middle of the living room, unsure what to do, until suddenly, knock, knock, knock. A knock came from the front door. My body immediately froze. Who? My voice was soft, almost inaudible. There was no answer, only the sound of the rain getting heavier. The knock came again, this time a little clearer. With hesitant steps, I approached the door. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle. I peeked through the small gap in the side window, and there stood Rian, soaked from the rain, in a thin jacket that was no longer of much help. I opened the door slowly. Sorry to bother you. His voice sounded calm, though his breathing was a little labored. I saw that your house was dark. The electricity was out too, huh? I nodded, still a little shocked. Yes, it suddenly went out. Rian looked up at the sky, and then back at me. The lights were still on where I was, perhaps on a different line. He paused for a moment, then added, If you're afraid to be alone, you can come to my house first. There's a spare light and a spare socket. I paused. It was a simple, reasonable offer, but for some reason, something inside me immediately rejected it and considered it. The rain was getting heavier.
Cold wind blew, making the atmosphere even more unfriendly. I glanced into my dark house, and then back at Rian, who was standing in the doorway. He waited for my answer without forcing it. Inside, two conflicting voices were racing. One said, "This isn't right. You should stay here." The other whispered, "You just need to feel safe tonight. That's all." I took a deep breath and, without being completely sure, I finally made a decision that I might regret or that would change everything. "I'll just come along for a bit," I said quietly, almost as if to reassure myself rather than answer Rian. He just nodded, not saying much, then stepped aside slightly to make way. I grabbed a light jacket and my phone and stepped out. As soon as the door locked behind me, for some reason, my heart started pounding faster than usual. Not just because of the cold, but because of something I couldn't yet fathom. The rain was still pouring down. We walked quickly to his house, which was just a few steps from mine. But those short steps felt like a long journey. It was as if I were crossing an invisible boundary. As soon as we entered, the atmosphere felt different. Warm, bright, unlike my dark, silent home. "Sorry it's a bit messy," he said, turning on an extra light. I shook my head slowly. It was okay. I sat on a chair in his living room. He got a small towel. Without a word, he handed it to me. The small gesture felt genuine. "Thank you," I said simply. The first few minutes were awkward. Only the sound of the rain outside and the occasional thunder could be heard. I held my phone, trying to call Dimas again, but it still wouldn't connect. "Still can't?" Rian asked quietly. I shook my head. The signal was poor. He sat not too far from me, not too close, but not too distant either. It was an odd but comfortable position. "If you need anything, just tell me," he said. I just nodded. Somehow the conversation began to flow from simple things about the rain and the power outages until it eventually turned more personal. He told me about his studies, about living alone away from his family, about how he sometimes felt lonely even though he was surrounded by so many people. I paused for a moment. The word lonely seemed to touch something inside me. I often feel that way too, I said unconsciously. He looked at me, not with a strange or judgmental look, but like someone who was truly listening. And for the first time in a long time, I felt heard. I started to tell him more about Dimas, about my routine, about the house that felt too empty every night. It all just flowed, without me thinking. It's strange, I smiled slightly. I shouldn't have told you this much. Rian smiled faintly. Sometimes we just need a place to talk. It was a simple sentence, but somehow it felt right. Right. Time passed imperceptibly. The rain hadn't let up. The clock on the wall showed late at night. I began to realize this wasn't just a short shelter anymore. Something had changed. The feeling that had started as a relief at not being alone slowly turned into a warmth that was hard to explain. And at that moment, I realized something that made me a little scared. I was starting to feel too comfortable in a place that wasn't supposed to be mine. The realization came like a gentle slap. It wasn't painful, but enough to make me pause. I stared at the warm cup of tea in my hand, trying to distract myself. I have to go home, I said suddenly, faster than I had planned, and Rian didn't answer right away. He just stared outside at the rain that was still pouring down with no sign of stopping. Now? He asked quietly. I nodded, though I still had doubts. Yes, it's too late. He stood and grabbed an umbrella from the corner of the room. I took it. His attention made me waver again. Everything felt too easy, too warm, for something that was supposed to be temporary. We stood by the door. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Only the sound of the rain filled the space between us. And that's where I felt something I can't explain. The distance was so close, yet it felt dangerous. I took a deep breath. Thank you for helping me. Rian nodded. Be careful. I stepped out under the umbrella, walking quickly back to my house. Each step felt heavy, not because of the rain, but because of my own thoughts. Once inside, I immediately closed the door and leaned against it. It was quiet, dark, but this time was different. This house wasn't just a quiet place anymore, but a place that felt too honest. It was like forcing me to confront something I'd forgotten. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and sat down on the couch. My mind was racing. What had just happened? Nothing was wrong. Nothing had actually crossed any boundaries. But this feeling was too clear to ignore. I reached for my phone and tried to call Dimas again. This time it connected. Yes, his voice sounded tired on the other end. I paused for a moment. There were so many things I wanted to say, but they all felt stuck in my throat. You're busy. In the end, that was all I could say. Yes, I'm busy. I'll call you back later. The call ended. Short. Cold. I stared at the screen, which had gone dark again. My chest felt tight. Not because of what had happened next door, but because of what I no longer felt in my own home. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew that from now on, nothing would truly be the same. I tried to convince myself that this was just another night, that tomorrow everything would be back to normal. But deep down, I knew one thing I could no longer deny. I'd crossed an invisible line, and there was no easy way back to the way things were. Those words echoed in my head all night, like a lingering echo. Morning came without real relief. The sunlight coming through the gap in the curtains felt strange. It seemed to clarify the reality I'd tried to ignore the night before. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at myself longer than usual. My face was the same, nothing had changed. But there was something different in my eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or a growing sense of guilt. That day, I tried to return to my routine, sweeping, cooking, tidying the house. I did everything as usual, as if nothing had happened. But my thoughts kept returning to that night, to the conversation, the warmth I'd felt, and the emptiness that followed. As evening approached, I heard the sound of the door next door opening. Reflexively, I stopped in my tracks. I knew it was Rian. For a few seconds, I stood still, holding back my gaze. I had to choose not about him, but about myself. With a deep breath, I stepped away from the window. I didn't want to repeat the same mistake. Or rather, I didn't want to give space to something I couldn't necessarily face the consequences of. That night, I tried to contact Dimas again. This time, I didn't want a short, bland conversation. I wanted to be honest. Not about what almost happened, but about how I'd been feeling all this time. The call connected. Hello, his voice was still the same. But this time, I didn't want to just listen. We need to talk. I said quietly but firmly. There was a pause on the other end. What's wrong? I closed my eyes for a moment, gathering my courage. I was tired of feeling alone. I know you work hard, but I need you too. Not just as a husband who sends news, but as someone who is truly there. Silence. The seconds felt longer than usual. I didn't know you felt that way. He finally answered, his voice becoming softer because I had been silent for too long. I replied. The conversation didn't resolve everything right away. There were ups and downs of emotions, misunderstandings that were revealed one by one. But for the first time in a long time, we actually spoke. Without realizing it, my tears fell. Not from sadness, but from relief. A few days later, Dimas came home earlier than scheduled. When I saw him standing at the door, a warm feeling slowly returned and remained. A feeling that had almost disappeared. We weren't perfect right away, but we were trying to be together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt less alone. It didn't come with a big bang or a sudden change. It came slowly like morning light coming through a crack in the window. Warm, calm, and soothing. The days after Dimas's return felt different. See, not because everything was perfect right away, but because we started to really see each other again. Little things that once seemed trivial now became meaningful. Breakfast together, short chats in the afternoon, even just sitting side by side without saying much. It all felt enough. Dimas started to be home more often, not because his work had decreased, but because he was learning to reorganize his priorities. And I learned the same thing, learning not to bottle things up, not to wait to be understood without speaking. One afternoon, as I was watering the plants in front of the house, I saw Rian standing in the neighboring yard. For a few seconds, we stared at each other. There was no long smile, no conversation, just a small nod. It was as if we both understood that whatever had happened, or almost happened, should just stop there. He went back inside, and I continued with my activities. There were no excessive regrets, nor any desire to repeat myself. All that remained was a lesson about how easily one can get lost in loneliness and how important it is to protect what one already has. That night, I sat next to Dimas in the living room. He was telling me about his work, and this time I truly listened, not just nodding, but being fully present. I leaned my head on his shoulder. He said nothing, just gently holding my hand. Simple, but enough. I smiled slightly. Deep down, I knew life doesn't always go as planned. There will always be temptations, mistakes, and decisions that feel gray. But in the end, what determines it isn't the situation, but the choice. And I'm grateful that, among all the possibilities that had opened up, I chose to back. Not because I never wavered, but because I finally understood where I truly wanted to go home.